Watch this footage carefully. A young woman steps into a hotel elevator. She presses every single button. She hides in the corner like something is chasing her. She peeks out into the hallway. Nothing there. She waves her arms in strange, jerky motions, like she's talking to someone who isn't visible. Then the doors close, and Elisa Lam is never seen alive again. 19 days later, guests at the same hotel complain the water tastes strange, looks dark, smells wrong. Maintenance climbs onto the roof to check the water tanks. Inside one of them, floating face up, naked, is Elisa's body. The elevator video would go on to be watched over 10 million times, and to this day, nobody can fully explain what it shows. Elisa Lam was 21 years old, a student from Vancouver, Canada, traveling alone down the west coast of the United States in early 2013. She was smart, introspective, and kept a detailed public blog where she wrote about her struggles with bipolar disorder and depression, along with her hopes for the trip ahead. She planned to visit Santa Cruz, San Diego, and finally Los Angeles before heading home. On January 26th, she checked into the Cecil Hotel in downtown L.A., a budget hotel with a reputation that already unsettled locals. A building with a genuinely dark history stretching back decades, tied to two convicted serial killers who had stayed there in the 1980s, along with a string of suicides so frequent that some floors had window bars installed specifically to stop people from jumping. Elisa was staying in a shared dorm room, but within days her behavior started to worry the other guests enough that hotel staff moved her into a room by herself. Her family, back in Canada, had been talking to her regularly, and everything seemed fine. Then, on January 31st, the calls and texts just stopped. Her parents, unable to reach her, contacted the Los Angeles Police Department to file a missing persons report. Detectives came to the hotel, searched her room, found her belongings, her identification, her medication, all still there. What they didn't find was Elisa. On February 6th, LAPD released the now infamous elevator surveillance footage to the public, hoping someone watching would recognize her and come forward with information. Instead, the video did something nobody expected. It went viral almost instantly, spreading across news outlets and internet forums within hours. And once people started really watching it, frame by frame, the questions multiplied faster than any answers could keep up. In the footage, Elisa enters the elevator and presses several buttons at once, later confirmed by police to be every floor button on the panel. The doors don't close. She steps out into the hallway, looks both ways as though checking for someone, then steps back in. She presses buttons again. Still, the doors won't shut. She backs into the corner of the elevator and appears to be hiding, pressing her body against the wall. Then, she steps out again, and her arms begin moving in odd, exaggerated gestures, bending at strange angles, fingers splayed, while her face looks as if she's talking, maybe pleading, to someone just out of frame in the hallway. The elevator doors open and close several more times around her, almost as if the mechanism itself were malfunctioning, though later technical reviews found no fault with the elevator at all. After roughly 2.5 minutes, she walks out of frame and does not return. The internet did what the internet does with a mystery like this. It exploded with theories. Some viewers were convinced she was being pursued by someone standing just out of camera view, and that her strange hand movements were a desperate attempt to signal for help. Others became fixated on the idea that the Cecil Hotel itself was cursed, pointing to its body count over the decades as evidence something supernatural was at play. A particularly persistent theory claimed Elisa was suffering a psychotic episode, and that her jerky movements matched a specific pattern sometimes seen in acute manic or psychotic states. True crime forums picked apart every frame, freezing individual seconds and debating what her hands were forming, whether her lips were shaping words, whether shadows in the hallway behind her meant anything at all. Amateur sleuths tracked down a Mexican metal musician who had once stayed at the Cecil and accused him online of being involved, forcing the man to go public just to clear his name after he received death threats from strangers convinced he was a murderer. Then, on February 19th, nearly 3 weeks after she vanished, hotel guests began reporting that the water pressure was low and the tap water had a foul taste and an unusual color. A maintenance worker went up to the hotel's rooftop water tanks to investigate. What he found inside one of the 4 massive cistern tanks was Elisa Lam's body. She had been in the water, submerged and undiscovered this entire time, while guests below had been drinking, cooking with, and showering in that same water supply, with no idea a body was decomposing just above their heads. The logistics of how she got there became almost as disturbing as the discovery itself. To reach the tanks, someone would need to climb a ladder to the roof, pass through a door that was supposedly alarmed and locked, and then lift open a heavy hatch weighing enough that investigators questioned whether one person alone could do it, let alone climb inside and pull the hatch shut behind them from within the water. The alarm on the rooftop door, it turned out, was not actually functioning at the time. Still, the specifics didn't add up cleanly for a lot of people, and that gap between the physical difficulty of the act and the official explanation is exactly what kept the case burning online for years afterward. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office eventually ruled Elisa's death an accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. Toxicology reports showed she had been off her prescribed medication and had trace amounts of other substances in her system, though nothing at a level considered the direct cause of death. Investigators concluded that Elisa, in the midst of a severe manic or psychotic episode, climbed to the roof herself, opened the tank, and got inside. Behavior that, while extreme, has documented precedent among people experiencing acute psychiatric crises who sometimes seek out unusual, hidden, or elevated spaces during an episode. The strange elevator footage, under this explanation, isn't evidence of an attacker at all, but a visible, tragic record of a young woman in the grip of a mental health crisis, alone, confused, and frightened by something only she could perceive. For a lot of the true crime community, that explanation, however clinically sound, never fully closed the emotional gap the video had opened. There's something uniquely unsettling about watching a real, identifiable person on camera in what appears to be their final lucid moments, especially when her actions look so deliberate and yet so inexplicable. It doesn't feel random. It feels like there's a hidden logic to her movements that the viewer is simply not equipped to decode, and that unresolved tension between watching something so specific and understanding nothing about it is a huge part of why the footage still circulates and unsettles new audiences well over a decade later. The Cecil Hotel itself couldn't survive the aftermath. Already struggling with its reputation, the hotel saw a wave of renewed public fascination combined with disgust, and it eventually closed for renovations, later reopening under a different name and operating model, distancing itself as much as possible from the events of 2013. The building has since become something of a dark tourism landmark and the subject of documentaries, podcasts, and countless video essays, each one trying and mostly failing to offer a fully satisfying explanation for those 2.5 minutes of footage. Some visitors still report an oppressive, watched feeling on the upper floors, though whether that's genuine unease or the simple power of suggestion is impossible to separate at this point. What makes the Elisa Lam case endure isn't a lack of an official answer. The coroner did rule on cause of death, and the physical evidence does support that ruling. What makes it endure is the video itself, an unscripted, unfiltered window into someone's private final moments that the entire world ended up watching, dissecting, and still, to this day, cannot fully agree on how to read.